Professor Dershowitz?
Yes, hi.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for talking to me.
Oh, sure. I'm just for protection of both of us. I want to record my side of the conversation, if that's okay.
Oh, that's fine.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. My first question is, do you have a personal definition of international law?
Law is that law which is equally applicable to all countries. Not equally applicable to all countries, it's law. A Chinese judge who was the chief judge in the International Court in The Hague would apply the same rules that he applied to Israel to the Chinese occupation of Tibet and to the Chinese building of walls in Tibet and to the Chinese settlements in Tibet. And imagine being to talk about that as law. But the fact is that the Chief Justice of The Hague would never apply that rule to China. He would apply it only to Israel. And therefore it's not law, it's power and politics.
So in other words, if a rule does not have universal application...
That's right. It has to have universal application. Also, the lawmaker or the law definer has to be an institution which is equally open to all countries. So that, for example, the fact is that Israel cannot serve on the court in the Hague. The way the justices are selected,
right.
In fact, it's impossible for an Israeli judge ever to serve on that court.
Right.
That would disqualify that court from administering justice in the same way that a Mississippi court in the 1920s could not administer justice fairly to blacks as well as to whites because blacks could not serve on the court, and rules that had applied to blacks that did not apply to whites.
Okay, I got that. So how would you? So is NAFTA international law?
It's treaty. It's contractual. And it's only binding on those parties that agree to it. It's a very different kind of international law. It's like you and I could agree to have a contract, and as long as the contract were not against public policy, that contract would be law, but it wouldn't be binding on a third party.
Okay. So does international law come through treaties?
It can come through treaties.
Okay.
It can come, there are so many different kinds of international law. There's customary international law.
Right.
There is binding international law that has developed over time. There is international law by treaty. There is a range of international law, but I'll give you another example. The United Nations General Assembly declared that Zionism was a form of racism.
Right.
That was not international law. That was simply politics.
Right. So then you do say that international law could be regional, local, universal, bilateral?
It could be any of those things so long as the parties were treated equally, the parties who agreed to it. The enforcement mechanism was fair and equal.
Yeah.
Those are the primary criteria for me.
Now, in terms of international criminal law, do you believe that the International Criminal Court is established according to international law?
It's much closer than the International Court of The Hague for several reasons. One, it was not established by the United Nations. It is not a General Assembly court. It doesn't take its cases from a political decision, for advisory opinions, whereas the International Criminal Court has an independent prosecutor, and the court presumably is open to all members, and there hasn't been enough time yet to determine whether it will apply international law or not. I think it will, and that's why I've urged the United States to join it.
Okay.
And I supported it very strongly because I think it's the structure of the International Criminal Court is much better than the International Court of Justice. Much better.
Okay. Now, coming back on to the International Court of Justice,
right.
Alan, you have said that it's a bigoted court, it's a kangaroo court. Have you said that?
I have.
Now, what do you mean?
I mean that I mean what I say when I said it's very much like the Mississippi Supreme Court in the 1920s. That is, the Mississippi Supreme Court could do justice and did do justice. It was, in fact, a very fine court when it came to doing justice between whites. When a white sued a white or a white charged a white with crime, the white judges could administer white justice to white litigants.
Right.
But when it came to a case involving a black versus a white, it could not do justice. It was a kangaroo court. It was an improperly constituted court. The same thing is true, and cannot do justice in any case involving.
Just bigoted only with respect to Israel?
Oh, no. I think it's. I think the most visible form of bigotry is against being, at least, being bigoted. Right.
Now, when you said that the ICJ is bigoted,
right,
I take it what you're really saying is that the 15 judges are bigoted.
Oh, no, not all of them. No. The structure is such as to assure a bigoted result.
What do you mean by structure?
The structure, the way the judges are selected.
Uh-huh.
And so, for example, you have a Palestinian judge from Egypt. You have a Jordanian
right now?
Judge.
Right now we have a Jordanian judge?
Isn't there a Jordanian judge? A judge who's Jordanian by origin, my understanding.
We also have judges from the United Kingdom.
That's right.
You think he's bigoted too?
No. Oh, no, she. I know that.
She's not bigoted.
No. I don't think that individual judges are necessarily bigoted any more than the individual judges who sat on the Mississippi process, by which the
Is Professor Bergenthal bigoted?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
No, and I think many of the judges are not bigoted individually, and I think if you ask me about the names of individuals on the Mississippi Supreme Court, I would say the same thing. They're not bigoted.
So right now, the court as it is constituted, right now,
court.
All judges?
No. It's a bigoted court. That is the process.
Now, how do you distinguish between court and the judges at a given time?
Well, it's the process and who they answer to, and what their method of selection is. All you need is a majority of judges who are predisposed.
Sure. But this was 14-1 on the Israeli wall.
No, I understand that.
So would you say any of the 14 judges was not bigoted?
I think probably some were not, but the outcome was predetermined. As you know, I wrote an article about it.
I read it in the Jerusalem Post.
The day before the decision came down.
Right.
Because I knew for certainty what the decision was going to be.
Right.
And, in fact, I was surprised there was even one dissenting vote. And, by the way, I'm not now suggesting that, it's a little bit like Bush versus Gore in the Supreme Court, which was also a non-lawful decision.
Right.
It's not that necessarily you can't justify in an abstract way some of the statements made in the court's decision. It's just that they wouldn't apply the same statements to another country.
Right.
They would simply not apply that conclusion to China. The fact is that China has occupied Tibet far longer than Israel has.
You mean sua sponte, or?
Say that again?
I mean, the court does not say it on its own?
No, the case can't come because the General Assembly would never bring that case. See, the whole process by which they get cases is bigoted because the General Assembly would never vote to bring the China case in front of the International Court, just like a prosecutor would never bring a case in which a white person killed a black person in Mississippi before the court. It's the whole process by which cases come before the court. You can't look at justice as an isolated instance and ask the question, is this particular judge bigoted or is that particular judge bigoted? The question is the process bigoted? And the process is bigoted, yes.
Okay. Now, on another matter, on torture, I think you have a very interesting theory. And by the way, I really like your books because the one thing I really like is that all of a sudden you have this great desire to please the reader with jokes, and that was very interesting.
I appreciate that. It's my life. My life is full of humor, so I use humor everywhere. I use it in the courtroom. I use it in the classroom.
Yeah, which is very refreshing. That in a very serious argument, you would introduce humor.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Now, in torture, do you still have the same views as you express in your book?
I hope you understand my views.
Yeah, I understand it fully with nuance.
Torture.
Yes.
I'm against torture.
I
don't think torture should ever be used. I think torture is being used and will be used. I make a distinction between the normative and the empirical.
Sure.
And if torture is in fact being used, as it was at Abu Ghraib prison and elsewhere, I think that it's very important to bring that issue to the surface and to have rules in the actually impossible to use.
Sure.
I am, if anything, a realist, and my realism tells me that there is no way that we failed when we've tried to just ban torture. That has been a failure. It's produced rampant hypocrisy. So I'm proposing what I think is a better way, and that is to require before any extraordinary means of interrogation are used, any extraordinary means, anything more than what's, did you do it, what's there, that there has to be accountability. There has to be a specific warrant either granted by a judge or by the President or the Secretary of Defense, specifying the reasons why the rules can be different in this case, specifying the precise nature of the change, specifying how long and what means can be used. And I think if that were done, we would move a long way toward abolishing the use of torture. So that's my view.
No, I understand that. I've got two questions. One is that you do not believe in absolute prohibition of torture.
Oh, I don't believe in absolutes of anything.
Right, including torture.
Including torture.
Now, in your book you say that the Geneva Convention on Torture does prohibit completely.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so then you do not agree with the goal of the Geneva Convention on Torture.
I agree with the goal, not with the means. I agree with the goal. Of course I agree with the goal. I would like to see torture
totally prohibited?
Totally prohibited.
But you think it's not practical?
I don't think... Look, virtually every country that signed the treaty with the right hand tortures with the left hand.
Right. Now, the second question is that would you extend this logic to other areas of law?
Yes.
Okay, including assassination?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I'll give you another example.
Yeah.
Under current international law,
right,
if the former Soviet Union, for example, had bombed New York with an atomic bomb killing 10 million people,
right,
the United States could not retaliate by bombing Moscow. It's absolutely prohibited.
You mean legally or?
Legally.
Yeah.
Legally, it's absolutely prohibited to bomb a civilian population center, even in retaliation.
Right.
For that law simply has to be changed, because if that law remains on the books, and if it means that law-abiding countries like the United States have no deterrent threat, and if they have no deterrent threat, if mutually assured destruction is not feasible, then the alternative is preemption. And I think preemption is far more dangerous than deterrence. So that's another example of international law that is aspirational, but as a result of its naivete, it is totally and completely not only counterproductive, but extremely destructive.
Yeah.
The other one that's very destructive, it's not an absolute, obviously, is that when terrorists hide among civilians, my view is that international law should declare that it's permissible to go after the to go after the terrorists if you can do so with proportional damage, only proportional damage, and that every civilian killed is attributable not to the people who dropped the bomb, but to the terrorists who are hiding among them. I would make the analogy to the shield cases, where if a bank robber comes out holding a shield in front of him and the policeman shoots him dead, shoots the shield dead, the murderer is the person who is using him as a shield, not the policeman.
Right. Now, I think there's a jurisprudential question in this regard. Do you make a distinction between deviation from a norm and the abandonment of the norm?
Yes, I do, and that's why I don't like abandonment of norms. I like deviation with accountability. That is, if you have to deviate from a norm and you can make the case persuasively, then it ought to be done within the law. that's why, for example, the necessity defense is a lawful doctrine, not an extra-lawful doctrine, but you have to justify taking action, which is the old saying that says necessity knows no law. That's wrong. Necessity does know law, and you have to justify your actions as necessary. And I'd like to see that apply in general to the way we deal with what others call tragic choices or impossible dilemmas. I mean, what I've been working on for years and years and years and writing about, and I'm writing a new book on it called Rights, is that when we have tragic choices, impossible dilemmas where there's no right answer, where all the answers are wrong, we need to have a structure for bringing those decisions within the law and not simply leaving them to the untrammeled discretion of low-ranking decision makers. Another example.
Right.
Am I in favor of shooting down airplanes with 300 people in it? Of course not. But if an airplane with 300 people in it is approaching the Olympic Stadium in Greece with 10,000 people in it, everybody will agree that that airplane has to be shot down. Now the question is, who makes that decision?
Right.
It should not be made by the low-ranking policeman on the ground, because who knows? Maybe it's not a plane that's been hijacked. Maybe the hijackers have been overcome by the passengers. If a mistake's going to be made, it has to be made by a very high-ranking official, the president, the head of NATO, the chief of security, somebody who has accountability. Now, nobody would say that it's right to shoot down an airplane. It's always wrong to shoot down a civilian airplane. But if that civilian airplane has become a military missile taken over by other people, then we may have to do what is absolutely necessary. But the question is how to do it and how to make a process for doing it. That, to me, is the kind of model for how we should make decisions in areas like torture, targeted assassination, preemptive actions of different kinds.
No, I think after reading your book on torture, I came with this conclusion that you're carving out a very small exception, and even that is, properly hedged. But do you fear that if you create a little exception, you're opening a door?
That's always a fear. That's always a fear.
How do you take care of that?
Well, you don't take care of it. What I say is that what I believe is that the exception today is much bigger. The exception today is proclaim that you're against torture, but do it when you have to do it. That's a very big exception.
But that's not a legal exception. I think that's an empirical exception, as you say.
It's a real exception. I'll tell you who thinks it's a legal exception. For example, Richard Posner, the chief judge of the United States Court of Appeals in Chicago. He says he hoped that torture would be used, but he doesn't want to put it within the law. He wants to leave it kind of silently to the discretion of low-ranking law enforcement officials. I think that's a much, much bigger exception than the exception that I would propose. The exception I would propose cabins it and limits it and makes it much, much more difficult to abuse. And by the way, that claim is an empirical claim. If it turns out I'm wrong, then I will apologize and say I was wrong. If it turns out, but I want to at least test my thesis.
But I think once you create an exception, then you're allowing cases to be built around it.
That may be. Look at the experience. I think that since Israel abolished torture with an exception, that's in 1999, where it says there may be an exception in the ticking bomb terrorist case. They didn't do it the way I thought they should do it. They didn't require a warrant. I would have made them require a warrant. And they say, but if you have to do it, you can come in front of a court and impose the necessity defense. I think most observers will tell you there has been less use of that than between 1990 and 1999, when the Landau Commission basically said, look, do what you have to do. So I think a narrow exception can reduce the incidence of torture. And if I'm wrong about that, that's an empirical claim, not a moral claim. If I'm wrong about that, time will tell.
Now, the second question on this is, would you allow this narrow exception to all states?
Well, I think if you apply it to any state, you have to apply it to every state. I would hope that Egypt would live within that narrow exception, because now they have a broad exception. I would hope that Jordan would live within that narrow exception, because now there's a broad exception. So, the narrow exception
So what you're proposing is a sort of international exception to an international rule.
That's right. And what I would say internationally is that any country that seeks to take advantage of that exception has to, within 48 hours or whatever, file a full report with some authorized agency explaining the reasons for it, having an affidavit by the President or the Chief Justice justifying the exception and making a public record of it, so that every instance of any extraordinary means of interrogation becomes a matter of public record, so that it can be explored and investigated openly instead of now it's under the table, it's beneath the radar screen.
Right. Now, I think that's a defensible position. On one of your articles that I have right in front of me, I think it was published last year in Jewish World Review, and the title is "Should Arafat Finally Be Assassinated?"
Yeah.
And you don't talk about Arafat, in the article.
Yeah,
you talk about Hamas leaders.
Yeah, I don't believe Arafat should be assassinated. Let me be very clear, and I've made my view on that known over and over again.
Okay.
I think he should be arrested and should be placed on trial, but I don't think he should be assassinated.
But do you think the assassination of Yassin was justified?
Not only justified, but highly desirable, yes. I think that he was a combatant. Yeah. He was a man who was giving the orders to terrorism, and so was and.
You mean specific orders, or was it a general policy?
Specific. I can tell you that the Israeli intelligence ordered his killing only after they learned that he had approved the specific orders to blow up the gas tanks at Ashdod, in which 10 were killed and hundreds could have been killed, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And my information has led the cabinet to authorize his killing. Remember, he couldn't be arrested. You can't. The Israelis use assassination, targeted killings, primarily in the Gaza, not in the West Bank. In the West Bank, they primarily arrest, and in the Gaza, they can't arrest because they have no troop concentrations in large cities where the terrorists mostly hide. So that the options essentially are to kill or to leave alone. And I strongly support, more than just tolerate, but strongly support, myself would have approved it had I been in a position to do so. I think they're exactly analogous to Osama bin Laden, and if the United States could have killed Osama bin Laden prior to September 11th, I think the world would have applauded it.
So as a criminal lawyer, you're not disturbed that the executioner, who is relying on his own facts, may be making a mistake?
Of course I'm just concerned about that, and that's why Israel has this committee. It consists of a law professor, actually 3 law professors, human rights lawyer from Bar-Ilan University. I actually sat in on one of their committee meetings. And
which pre-authorize? The committee pre-authorizes?
The committee pre-authorizes. What they do is they pre-authorize the concept, and they're given the facts, but they're not given the names. They're given it in more abstract terms. But, for example, the committee was presented, as I understand it, with the following dilemma. When I was there was a man who was... there was no... In all these cases, the people who are killed, who are targeted, they're obviously innocent people, sometimes killed, and that's never right. But the people who are targeted almost always are self-proclaimed terrorist commanders. That is, they don't deny it, and when they're killed, almost always the organization issues a release saying, yes, he was involved in terrorist acts and he was proud of it, that kind of thing. So the case that I'm talking about was a man who was clearly appropriately a military target. He was a commander. He was the one who was authorizing particular acts. Yeah. But he always was with his wife. And the question was, would Israel authorize a bombing that would kill not only him but his wife? Yeah. And I know that the committee asked for more information. Was she somebody who was killed? Did she know? Was she aware? It's that kind of question that's being asked, and I think that in general that's a fairly sophisticated and ethical way of going about doing it. It would be, people say, that means you're in favor of extrajudicial killings. Well, yes. What I'm not in favor of is judicial killings. I am a strong opponent to the death penalty.
Yeah.
So if Yassin had been captured, I'd be opposed to executing him, just as I was opposed even to executing Adolf Eichmann. The first letter I ever wrote to a newspaper
So I don't know, how do you draw the distinction that you could be against capital punishment but not against extrajudicial
Oh, it's
killing?
very simple. Capital punishment, there's an alternative, life imprisonment. Whereas with extrajudicial killings, there's no alternative. It's either letting him go free. The same way you and I are both in favor of shooting fleeing felons if they're escaping and they're murderous and are likely to commit murders again, and the only alternative is to let him escape or to kill him, even though, I'm speaking for you now, I don't know if it's true, you favor the death penalty, you against the death penalty. Everybody who's against the death penalty, except a Quaker, favors shooting dangerous fleeing felons. And the same reason I'm against the death penalty, because there's an alternative of life imprisonment.
Yeah.
But I'm in favor of killing people who would otherwise escape and be able to continue to kill more people.
Because you can't stop them, therefore.
You can't stop them any other way. If you could stop them any other way, I'd be against it.
Yeah.
And that's, if you could tranquilize them, if you could isolate them, if you could lift them up and put them, take them 2,000 miles away, any alternative is better than killing them, except letting them remain free to continue their terrorist acts. So that's my position, yeah.
Yeah. Now let me ask you this question, that you have defended a lot of guilty people.
I have, yes. I don't know that they're
and
guilty.
You are saying, I defend them because there's a higher principle.
That's right.
What is that higher principle?
Well, first of all, when I defend people, I don't know which ones are guilty. I know that statistically many of them are guilty.
Right.
For example, I can tell you about...
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but
I
was getting interference from another phone. When I take a case, for example, I can tell you about one case, I can't tell you the name of it, where I was pretty sure the defendant was guilty, and I litigated the case for 2 years before I became convinced that he was innocent. And I said in a book that I wrote, I defend the I prefer a system that says better 10 guilty go free. Me that I'm obliged to do that. It would be ineffective assistance of counsel for me to do anything just on behalf of somebody who I came to believe was guilty. I would never do anything unethical. I'd never allow them to take the witness stand and lie, or I'd never...
Yeah. So then I take it that you're morally overly cautious in your higher moral principle, and you will defend the guilty or possible guilty or statistically probable guilty because you think,
That's right.
you're serving a higher principle,
That's right.
which is in fact protecting innocence.
And also the civil liberties.
And civil liberties.
Americans, right.
Now, if I may juxtapose, how would you justify, under the same higher principle, the demolition of homes in a village where the terrorist lives?
Well, first of all, demolition of homes to me is the most minor of sanctions available. I mean, not the most, I think. In property, it's the United States, for example. If somebody comes in with an ounce of marijuana in a private airplane that's worth $35 million, the United States will confiscate that airplane. Or if you rent your house to somebody and the police find drugs in the house, under the laws of some states, you can confiscate the house. It's designed as a deterrent. And I don't favor the destruction of houses. I favor only the destruction under very limited circumstances. I favor the destruction of houses that have been used knowingly by their owners to facilitate terrorism. I favor the destruction of houses with compensation, the other one without compensation. With compensation, when the houses are used as a cover for rockets or terrorist attacks, and I would favor the destruction of houses as a last measure of deterrence to prevent instead retaliation against human beings. I'd much prefer, for example, if after the Jenin, after terrorists from Jenin blew up an Israeli Seder and killing 29 people, I would much prefer if they could have found the homes of the people and knocked them all down to serve as a deterrent than to go into Jenin and cause the lives of 23 Israelis. I don't place a very high value on property. I place a very, very high value on life.
Okay. And I think you have said that the court has preferred property over life.
I think the international court seems to...
Yeah, that's what you have said too. So that's consistent.
Interest over life, yeah.
Yeah. Now, one of the lawyers, I think his name is Nathan Lewin.
Nathan Lewin, right.
Yeah. He has argued that the family members of suicide bombers can be executed.
Absolutely wrong. I'm absolutely, categorically, unalterably opposed to that.
Yeah. You're not even sympathetic it as a response to terrorism?
Not at all. And I've written about that extensively. I wrote about it in a book a long time ago called Just Revenge. It's been hot. No circumstance comes as close to an absolute principle as I'd be willing to come. And I'll give you an exception here and there, but that the deliberate and willful killing of an innocent person is never Holocaust. Some Jewish terrorist had blown up a kindergarten in Berlin, and it had worked. And the Nazis had shut down Auschwitz as the result of 30 German children dying, innocent children dying. 50,000 or 100,000 lives have been saved. Could you justify that? I think you could have an interesting debate about it, and Dostoevsky has that debate in the Brothers Karamazov. I think I would come down against doing it. I could not myself kill 30 innocent German children, and my general rule is if I can't do it myself, I wouldn't ask anybody else to do it. I could pull the trigger and kill Yassin and Ratzin and other terrorist commanders. I could do that if I had to, but I could not do it with children. Order a terrorist, knowing that there's a possibility that some people who are innocent. I could never order the killing of an innocent.
Now let me ask you this: do you believe that the people who are under occupation or under severe persecution have the right to resistance?
By passive resistance, the way Gandhi did it and the way Martin Luther King did it, but not by killing innocent civilians. No. I think there's a continuum. I think killing the soldiers who are an essential part of the occupation is far more justified than killing civilians. But I think that resistance is different. It takes very different forms, and also I just have to remind you, I'm sure you know that terrorism, as it started, so the occupation has not been the precipitating factor of the terrorism. It obviously it's made it worse and somewhat more justifiable in the eyes of some, not in mine.
So in theory, you would deny the right of armed resistance.
Armed resistance is different than killing civilians. The United States government, for example, when the United States revolted against England, we didn't send terrorists into London to blow up bars and restaurants, even though occupied. What we did is declared war against the occupying, and that's very, very different. Yeah.
Now, the word terrorism is, very loaded.
Right.
What if you say irregular warfare? That the people who don't have professional armies...
I have no problem with that as long as it's directed against soldiers. If it's directed against soldiers, it's irregular warfare. If it's directed against civilians, it's terrorism.
Yeah.
And I'm a critic of the United States' decisions to bomb.
Let me ask you this, Alan. Do you believe in divine justice?
No.
Do you believe in human justice?
Yes. Oh well, I believe in it. I believe in aspiring to human justice, but I don't believe in divine justice. So, and I'm just writing a book about that.
No, in Just Revenge, I think it's Max who says, I don't believe in divine justice and human justice. I believe in personal justice.
Well, no, I don't agree with, you don't always agree with your characters in your fiction.
So I was just wondering if you believe the same hierarchy or...
No, I believe I believe much more strongly in human justice. I write in my new book, because I'm a skeptic, I must be a moralist. Because I have doubts about the religious, therefore I have to be a moralist. And I have hard to come up with my own theory of justice, which then I would like to see generally. I think about these things all the time.
Sure.
I think about justice all the time. People may disagree with my views, but this is I try as hard as I can to come up with just theories. One of the men I miss most in the world was my...
Could I say that the love of Israel, the protection of it, is such a higher principle for you?
No, it's not. I mean, for me, Israel is a perfect example of hypocrisy. Were I an Israeli, I'd be quite critical of many of the government policies. For example, my own personal views on the fence are fairly critical and negative in many aspects. I distinguish, however, between my views, international court's views, no weight whatsoever to the international, having another country. But were I an Israeli, I'd be quite critical. And as a Jew, I hold Israel myself to probably a somewhat higher standard than I would probably hold some other countries. But I don't think that other people hold nothing more than to be up making the case for Israel. But I make the case for Israel because so many people...
Because I thought that since you have developed the guilty, maybe at some level you're doing the same with respect to Israel.
No, that's not...
Because you think there's a higher principle, and that higher principle is its existence, its continuation, and therefore I'm not going to get bogged down into law. I'm going to defend that.
No, I think I would like to defend Israel under the rule of law, under a fair rule of law. My own view, and I've said this in print, you'll be surprised to hear it, but I'll reiterate it. I don't think any country in the history of the world, any country, including no country in the history of the world, has ever been more solicitous of the human rights of its sworn civilians, for example, have been killed in 5 years of war, deliberately terrorism, and one could critical of that, but it never bombed Damascus or Cairo or Jordan. Tried very, very hard to reduce civilian deaths is called the worst. Then you really have to point the finger of accusation at the accusers. So that's been my point. Yes, I feel so strongly about human rights and about international law, and because I think the bigotry toward Israel has been destroying international law.
Why do you think, the General Assembly in such numbers is anti-Israel?
Well, they're also anti the United States. Somebody once said that if Algeria introduced a solution that the earth was flat and that Israel had flattened it, it would win by 142 to 4 with 61 abstentions. And the only countries that ever vote for Israel in the United Nations are the United States and 3 island nations somewhere in the Pacific that nobody's ever heard of.
Right.
And it can't be because, and by the way, the votes against Iraq weren't as one-sided. The votes against China are not as one-sided. The votes,
No, but I'm saying why?
Bigotry. A lot of it is anti-Semitism.
Throughout the world?
A lot of the world. If you look at what the Prime Minister of Malaysia said.
Now, I can understand the Muslims, but non-Muslims.
Well, France and Europe, Europe has a long, long history of anti-Semitism.
Right.
France has a long history of anti-Semitism. Austria, Germany, and the whole world isn't. If you look at the fence case, the vast majority of Western countries, almost every country that operates under the rule of law, voted against the court taking jurisdiction, and almost every country that voted in favor of the court taking jurisdiction was a tyranny that doesn't operate by the rule of law.
But all the European judges have voted for the demolition of the wall.
No, I'm not talking about the judges.
Yeah, you're talking about the states.
I'm talking about the countries themselves.
So don't you think when we go from the political to the judicial, then probably we can say that the judicial approach to Israel could be a little more acceptable than the political?
It's not, because there's no difference. Any United Nations court is going to be political. This judge, several of the judges who ruled against Israel were simply taking orders from their government. And anybody who doesn't believe that has to go back to school and take a first-year course in naivete. If you think that the Chief Justice, who is from China, who was an important member of the Chinese Communist Party, who served as a lawyer during the Cultural Revolution, which is the clear test, anybody who is a decent human being was put in a pig farm during the Cultural Revolution. If you were allowed to serve as a lawyer during the Cultural Revolution or a diplomat during the Cultural Revolution, you're a thug. And this judge is a thug.
No, those are very strong words.
Very strong word. He's a thug.
Yeah.
And the Chinese judiciary is a judiciary that is deserving of no respect. And let's remember, too, who the first political leader, who praised the killings at Tiananmen Square was Yasser Arafat, who wrote a telegram on behalf of the Palestinian people praising the Chinese government for putting down the disturbances.
Right.
So, it's just such hypocrisy to talk about human rights when we're talking in this way, I think.
I have a couple of more questions,
Sure.
then. I appreciate very much. I really enjoy talking to you. And I'm going to write an article on your views in international law. I disagree with you, but I am...
As long as you state my views...
I will state your views.
You sound like a person who's very fair and who will state my views fairly. I don't care who...
I will try my best.
Okay.
But I don't, guarantee it, because I don't know how it would come out. Okay, well, I will try my intentional best that I...
Right. I have a tape of what I said. So,
right.
Please don't take it out of context. Okay.
Let me ask you this: Do you feel that that there is a possibility of peace in the Middle East?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I can tell you what peace will look like. You might be surprised, but I favor and have favored since 1967 the two-state solution. I favor the establishment of a Palestinian state on all of the Gaza and almost all of the West Bank. I favor, for every inch of land that Israel takes from the West Bank, that it give back in kind an inch of land that now is part of Israel. I favor the end of the settlements. I also do favor, however, that there not be any restrictions on the right of Jews to live anywhere in the world, whether it be Jordan, which now has a statute against it, or Egypt, or the new Palestinian state. But I favor a two-state solution. I favor end of the occupation. I favor end of the settlements. I favor, a thriving, wealthy Palestinian state with contiguity between the West Bank and the Gaza, whether it be by a land bridge or leasing arrangements or something else. I favor access, the Palestinian state to the ports and to have water supplies. I believe I'm a better friend to the Palestinians than Yasser Arafat. That if I had been in charge of the Palestinians, they'd be celebrating their many anniversaries of statehood, certainly their third anniversary since Camp David and Taba. They'd be one of the wealthiest Arab states per capita because of the influx of wealth from Europe and from the United States and from the Marshall Plan. And I think that Arafat has been just a terrible, terrible leader. And I wish only the best for the Palestinian people. I want them to have a state.
Could there be only one state?
One Palestinian state?
Just one state.
No, that would be. Look, why not make one state of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh? You can't create artificial unions. One state would be just a Palestinian state.
So that's not acceptable.
Absolutely unacceptable. There has to be in the world one state which is predominantly Jewish. Israel is a secular Jewish democracy where Jewish culture can thrive and where Jews don't have to live as second-class minority citizens.
Because, you see, I don't know, I've written a book called Extinction of Nation-States, and I see that the states are no longer
that's fine. If after
viable concepts.
If all the other nation-states disappear, then I'd probably vote for Israel to go along with it. But I want to wait to see France do it first and Britain do it.
Are they not doing it? I mean, to some extent that the borders are open.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Certainly not many states. I haven't seen China doing it. I haven't seen Cuba doing it, and I haven't seen them being condemned for not doing it.
Yeah.
So to single out Israel and say you become the first experiment in this end of nationalism, the state that for 2,000 years tried to establish a Jewish state, and they're going to be the first to have to try the experiment. I don't think so. And I think we should start with maybe Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan and see how that works.
Yeah.
Or the former Yugoslavia.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Is there anything that Israel does to the Palestinians which is offensive to you?
Oh, many things.
No, just one. I just want one.
Yeah, the continuing occupation. The settlements. I don't like the building of settlements outside of areas right near Israel. Many things are offensive, and many things the Palestinians do to the Israelis are offensive. There isn't a country in the world that doesn't do things that are offensive to me. Many things the United States does is offensive. For example, remaining in Iraq.
Right.
So a lot of things are offensive to me, but Israel is the only country that people say, we disapprove of what you're doing, therefore you have no right to exist as
I mean,
a state.
it's singled out, you think?
It's singled out. I mean, The Guardian in London said that. We disapprove of the fence, therefore Israel has no right to exist as a state. That's a non sequitur, and it's the only country that it said that about. In fact, I wish if there weren't more criticism, if the criticism of Israel were to become proportionate and legitimate, I would join that criticism. One of the problems is it makes it harder for people like me, who are moderate critics, constructive critics of Israel, to have our voices heard because they're drowned out by the Noam Chomskys, the Norman Finkelsteins, the
Uri Avenari
and others. So that's one of the great tragedies, is that the kind of criticism that one hears in Israel of Israel is muted by the extreme criticism one hears at the United Nations and elsewhere.
Well, thank you very, very much. I
My
truly
pleasure.
appreciate
Can
that.
you do me a favor and send me a copy of your article when you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's going to take me a while because I think you have written so much, and your views are much more complex than they come across.
I appreciate that. And if you could make sure that you state my views with the complexity that they deserve, I would.
But definitely I don't agree with them, and so there's going to be disagreement.
That's fine.
And criticism. But I will try my best to present your view honestly and fairly.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Be well.
All right. Bye.